Welcome back to Success with Connections, or Through Connections, I should say. And today, my guest is Dr. Pat Baxter. I met Pat probably about a year ago when she was speaking in front of a group of women. And she was just fascinating talking about her subject, which is emotional intelligence. But let me tell you a little bit about Pat that you don't know. First of all, she's written not one, not two, not three, but 4 books on emotional intelligence. I'm impressed. That's pretty awesome. And her focus is really about women in the workplace and how emotional intelligence affects them and how we work. So I'm going to she's also, before I go a little further, I wanted to say she's a speaker. She's an executive coach, and she has spoken across the world, all over, probably back and forth over the different oceans, and speaking about her favorite subject, emotional intelligence, and how it affects women in the workplace. So I'm going to say thank you, Pat, for joining me today on this program.
Well,
And
thank you so much for inviting me.
I'd like to hear a little bit about your backstory. How did you get interested in emotional intelligence, and what propelled you to go forward with it?
Well, many moons ago, I started my work life as a school program administrator in the South Bronx in New York. I am a native New Yorker, if you can't tell by the accent.
It's there.
Uh,
there.
and sometimes the attitude as well.
I understand that.
And you're right. I've traveled all over the world, and what's really fascinating to me and what you focus on is connections.
Mhm.
And they're everywhere, everywhere. And what's been interesting is as you mentioned, I've traveled all over. I've done presentations at conferences in Europe, in Asia, and what's been interesting for me to reflect on is that the one connection that got me started lived across the street from me in New York. It was interesting. It was a neighbor. He was a vice president at an insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking as neighbors do. And I was telling him a little bit about the work that I was doing with this program. And he says, corporate America could use someone like you. Let me put you in touch with my headhunter. And I'm like, headhunter? What's that?
Oh.
And I had that conversation. They were looking for someone to head what eventually became a huge initiative in one of the largest banks in Wall Street. And that was the integration of technology into their business. And that was not an easy thing to do because people were absolutely frightened out of their mind with what technology would do to their work, their relationships. And Wall Street is one of those places where I have to say that the 20th century left with a whimper and the 21st century came in with a bang. So that's what my work was about, was helping this particular organization assimilate technology, get some senior executives, and this is true. When I was trying to get senior executives to even touch the computer, one said to me, executives don't do keyboards, secretaries do.
You got
Okay.
a typewriter.
It was like, okay. Okay. And I actually had one break down and cry because he realized the technology was going to decimate his staff, that he would be losing as much as 50% because the technology would be taking on their jobs.
Kind of
So
like AI today,
I'm sorry, what?
kind of like artificial
Oh,
intelligence today.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely. You are spot on with that. And I every day, and I'm learning myself a lot about artificial intelligence. AI is like, it's going to be one of the biggest challenges for us as workers, as individuals, as communities. And I've already seen some of the implications of it with some of my clients. So that is, as I say, TBD, to be to be
To
seen,
be determined. Yeah,
to
it's
be
true.
determined, right?
I'll give it a prompt and it blows me away at how it's thinking. I'll give it a very complicated prompt that a person would have to really like, please analyze this, and it does. Yeah.
It's amazing. A friend of mine 2 days ago sent me a link. She had to come up with a course very quickly. I forgot what the subject was, but she had to find some way to do it so she could send the outline to her potential client almost immediately. She found a site that literally puts together a workshop with the topics, the sequence, the questions, the materials. And I'm like, what?
Just
What?
took the place of.
What? I'm afraid to ask this. What's next?
uh I know my grandchildren. What's next? I mean, they're born with a device in their hand. Like, oh, you're born.
Exactly.
Here's your device.
Yep. Here, go off. See ya. So
So,
that's where I got started. That one connection across the street from me got me on this road of helping organizations assimilate change
mhm.
to as much as they could accept the change and then ride the change.
Yes,
So
yes.
that's where I was, and I did that. I've done that again around the world for about 30 years.
So talk to me a little bit about this emotional intelligence and why it's so crucial for the success in the workplace.
Well, one of the things that I figured out along the way with the changes that I was helping organizations with is that change is all about emotion.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's it's all about emotion. And like that like that gentleman who literally broke down and cried in front of me. I mean, that's what he was really understanding that he was going to lose what he perceived as part of his family, his staff. And that's all about connection. That's all about feeling the emotions of loss, and that that really was something that always stuck with me. And fast forwarding, at the tender age of 59, I decided to go back to school and finish my doctorate.
Oh, wow.
So
That's okay. I had an aunt well into her 80s when she went back to school to get her master's even. I was like, and she was in her 80s. It's all good. You're doing it. Hey, change is important.
I don't like
Change.
leaving things undone. So I went back to school and going in for my doctorate in organizational leadership. And there comes a time in the process where you have to start to focus on what are you going to be doing your research and your dissertation on.
Mhm.
And at that time, Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence was extremely popular, very well used. Lots of courses were using it. And one of my professors, Hank Clemens, who unfortunately has passed on, but he was brilliant in terms of how he understood the role of emotional intelligence. As a matter of fact, he started the Society for Emotional Intelligence that's now global. And what I came to understand through Hank was that emotional intelligence is more than a coping tool. It's more than survival, it is thriving. And that spoke to me. And so I dove into what is emotional intelligence, how do we use it, and what happens when you do use it, and even more important, when you don't use it.
Would you say that emotional intelligence is kind of like adjusting your attitude, being positive? You can be negative. The glass is half full, it's half empty. That's your feelings and your emotions.
It's more than anything else, Zelda, it's being aware of your emotions. The number one skill that I, when I'm working with clients and helping them develop and utilize their emotional intelligence, is self-awareness. Tuning into yourself. How am I feeling? How am I feeling about this? What kinds of, and very often, memories are prompted by your emotions? How are they affecting how you're making a decision, how you're viewing this individual? One example is, I had a client who was really an extraordinary salesperson, but there was one deal that she could not close. And her manager called me and said, "Do you think you can help her?" I said, "Well, let's see." And so I sat down, interviewed her. Long story short, what wound up happening was that the person, the man she was negotiating with, reminded her of her ex-husband.
Well, we can see that plain and clear.
So, but can you imagine when this veil came off her eyes and she said, "Ah, that's what's happening." I said that too, but it was a revelation. And so we began to develop strategies and tools, because emotional intelligence is a set of skills and tools
Well, that's what
that
kind
you
of
can
gets me
use.
is what you're talking about, how you should be. It's kind of like being self-aware, knowing that, okay, wait, the reason this isn't working is because this guy reminds me of my ex-husband who I'm no longer involved with, and yuck. So, how do you teach yourself, or are there tools or assessments that can help someone recognize when they're going down that wrong path so that they can make better decisions?
I would say that the number one clue that there might be something going on is that you keep going down the same path over and over again and getting the same result.
Oh, yeah.
So which was what was happening with this individual. She wasn't closing it. She wasn't closing the deal. So that was a big clue. But when I'm working with individuals on this, on emotional intelligence, we always start with the self. What am I good at in terms of managing my emotions? When do I tend to go off the rail? And it always starts with assessment. And when I'm coaching individuals, when I'm coaching leaders in particular, we talk about their environment, what is going on in their world right now, personally, yes, and professionally. And I do an assessment, a validated assessment that I happen to use, EQI 2.0, and we talk about the results, and we all always aware that that is a snapshot in time, but it's a snapshot can give that snapshot can give us insight into how they are perceiving the situation, the people around them, themselves. And we go from there. And we always understand that there's a place to start that doesn't have to be painful. It can be revealing.
I
And that
guess
sometimes is
it should probably
that's a
start with
release.
self-awareness,
Yeah.
that, wait, I'm behaving this way. It reminds me, I was given a speech yesterday, and when I was done, I was sitting at this table and they had these questions, and a real intelligent woman was, she was, you could tell she could have been a New Yorker. She could be tough. You could tell she could be tough. And so we were discussing, how do you address people in different situations? And I could tell that she was just flat out blunt with people. And she would scare me. And I would say, I wouldn't look at a situation that way. I would not confront people in that such a blunt manner. I like to give people space to exit, a safe place, and it's the way you talk to people. Maybe that's just me, but I want to give people an out. That's
Mm.
my way of dealing. I don't, even though I feel that somebody needs to be redirected or reprimanded or whatever you want to call it, you do it in the right way.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That just kind of reminded me of this woman when she was talking about how she's just going to tell you it like it is. And I'm like, whoa, don't want to make her mad at me. So to me, that was so. How do you overcome some of the challenges of and the barriers for developing emotional intelligence? How do you overcome them?
Well, Zelda, first of all, I want to commend you because what you just expressed was not only leaving someone an out, but leaving someone whole,
Mhm.
not with a hole, but
Right.
whole,
Yeah.
and being able to walk away from a conversation with you that says, I'm okay. I'm okay. I understand there's opportunity. As a client of mine said last week, there's always an opportunity to improve.
Yeah.
But once a person becomes aware of the lens through which they may be viewing a situation or a person, like the example I gave before, it then gives them an opportunity to find tools, ways to phrase something, or ways to, frankly, back off so that someone has the room to be who they are. And that, I think, has been one of the lessons that I've been able to learn along the way. I also have realized, and one of the things that I thought about in terms of connection, and I did a presentation on this earlier this year. Connection is all about empathy.
Mm.
Empathy for me is the number one requisite for all of us as human beings. The ability to say, I may not be walking in your exact size shoes, but I've worn them before.
Exactly.
So people who have been traumatized, people who have been, uh, I would say, penalized for being who they are and not accepted, you want to be able to reach out to them and say, I see you. I
Mhm.
see you and I hear you. And that is a form of validation.
Yes.
It's a form of empathizing with someone.
Yeah.
It's not, and a lot of people ask the difference. What's the difference between sympathy and empathy? Empathy, you actually can feel it. You can say, I have felt that before. I know what it is to lose something or someone. And that's really a huge component, I think, of emotional intelligence, and one that I always encourage leaders to express and show to their teams. I've had leaders that have expressed empathy to me in situations, and I know one thing, I would follow them anywhere.
Oh, wow. Yes. Yes, exactly. I can so relate to what you're saying. In fact, that's really what I talk about is when I tell my story, it's about how a tornado changed my life.
Right.
But everybody has a tornado. It could be a medical crisis, it could be a financial crisis, maybe you had a flood, who knows? But it's that you understand you've been through a disaster, you've got that emotion, you know what it's like to have that loss.
Yeah,
In a win,
exactly.
or even a win. Could be a positive thing too that you've both
That's
experienced.
true.
So I just tend to think of the negative, but I should be thinking about the positive things that people have in common. Yes, absolutely. So, Pat, you've written 4 books. Tell me a little bit about the books.
Well, right behind me here is the first one, Cool Change, which I wrote, um, purging out my Wall Street experiences.
Okay.
It was that kind of a purge. But it's really interesting. I spoke, I think it was last week or the week before, to a group here in Jacksonville that was just getting started, and it's a group of young emerging women leaders, the powerhouses that were in that room. I mean, the energy was amazing. One of them happened to have gotten this book. And she said that the lessons that I speak about in there are ones that she could translate to today. And I said, well, then, then my experience has been worth doing that. The other ones that I've written have been about what we just talked about, empathy, and being involved with young women leaders is the third one. The fourth one is, which I'm going to be revising, is about delegation and perfectionism.
Okay.
Which is interesting. This came from someone.
What's the connection of those? I'm a big delegator. I love to delegate. So what's the connection of those two things?
I'm glad you asked that, because I had someone call me and said, Pat, you've spoken with our group before. We'd love to have you come back. And I said, okay, great. You know, what topic are you thinking about? And she says, delegation. And I was like, delegation? That's kind of step one, step two, step three. And she said, no, for some reason, our group is having issues with being able to give things away, to give tasks without like constantly monitoring over the person. So I started to do research on it. And there's a lot of research around perfectionism and its effect on how and
You don't
if
want to give up
women
control.
delegate.
Yeah.
And it was just fascinating to me. So the first version, I guess it was a year and a half ago, I'm going to be redoing, because there's more research out there. And particularly now, it's so important for young women leaders to understand perfectionism is not the goal. It's not the goal. You as a leader have, and this is Pat, you as a leader have an obligation to develop your people.
Absolutely.
You will not have people developing if you don't give them opportunities
Yes.
to,
Yeah.
yes, make mistakes
I know.
and
Even though
screw
you
up.
know they're headed down the wrong path and you know they're going to make the mistake, they got to learn. They've got to learn. Well, Pat, this has been so fascinating. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode, because you have given us valuable insights. Just
Thank you.
light bulb
Thank you.
moments. They're awesome. So thank you. How can people reach you, get your books, connect with you?
Well, there's my website, drpatbaxter.com. And of course, my email is hello@drpatbaxter.com. Real easy. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, audience, for joining us. What a fantastic conversation we've had today. And as a parting, let me remind you to keep building those connections, because those connections lead you to great opportunities. And as my audience knows, I am a full-time realtor. So if anyone out there across the nation needs a stellar realtor anywhere in the United States, from coast to coast, I am connected to some of the best top tier realtors across the nation. So my network is vast. The standards that I have for the other realtors that I refer you to, my standards are super high, and your satisfaction is always guaranteed. Till next time, I'm Zelda, Success with Connections.